The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
The St. Louis Board of Aldermen recently reconvened for its new session, and Alderman Jack Coatar of the 7th Ward is in the middle of some major policy discussions, including paving the way for medical marijuana and bringing a soccer team to the St. Louis area. Coatar joins us on the latest edition of Politically Speaking to talk about what's percolating around the Board of Aldermen.
This is Politically Speaking, the longest-running episodic podcast about Missouri politics.
It's a little complicated in Bolivar because there is a Parsons family there.
But we also knew that it was important to make sure that we got to where we needed to go.
You know, if you walk in a room and you're getting ready to make a decision and everybody in the room looks like you need to stop.
And right now what happens in the United States Senate is as critical as anywhere else in the country.
I really want the state to succeed.
Well, we want everybody to know that we're all working together.
I just worked hard to try to build my name where I didn't have the money.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a political correspondent for St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today is
Rachel Lippmann, one of his fellow political reporters.
And St. Louis's most successful suburban Chicago native politician returns for the first time, I think, since 2015.
Yeah, I was here right after I got elected, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where does the time go? By the way, your name is?
My name's Jack Coatar. I'm the 7th Ward Alderman from the city of St. Louis.
And just remind listeners what the boundaries of your ward
roughly
is.
Certainly. So the 7th Ward includes the entire central business district of downtown. So all of downtown to the east of Tucker, all the way up to Laclede's Landing, almost all of Soulard, most of Lafayette Square, and then some portions of McKinley Heights, Fox Park, and Compton Heights.
Yeah, there's that one litlittle line straight down.
Yes, the 7th Ward and one portion goes all the way to the corner of Shenandoah and Compton, which is technically Tower Grove East.
Just amazing what happens when people get their hands on crayons to draw these districts.
Well, are you sure Declan didn't draw this map?
No, I think that the Board of Aldermen in 2011 drew this map, but we're not here to talk about that.
That's old news.
We're going to talk about a lot of things that have been percolating around city politics and regional politics, and I'm going to start off with a pretty open-ended question. The Board of Aldermen just came into session a couple weeks ago. What are going to be the things that you're going to be working on are going to be priorities for you?
Yeah, so we're back. A bunch of board bills already filed. The thing I'm working on first and foremost is Board Bill number 2, which are the city's proposed zoning changes to bring us into compliance and to make it easier for folks interested in medical marijuana to operate in the city of St. Louis.
So a little bit about where are these operations going to be allowed to be? I've looked at it, and it seems to restrict it to the areas where you think it would be commercial districts, industrial districts. What's the rationale behind kind of keeping it in those areas?
So just to put in perspective, Amendment 2 passed in November, obviously. Got 83% of the vote in the city, 86% in my ward. It's a topic I'm very interested in, both from a legal perspective and from just a public wellness and well-being perspective. So what we sought to do was make it easy for people to operate here. You're limited in your number of licenses, right? If you look at dispensaries, we're looking at about 24 per congressional district. City being entirely in the 1st congressional district. It's my hope that we can get as many of those 24 in the city, because what Amendment 2 provided for local government is basically 2 functions. We get to participate in the zoning, which we're doing right now, and we get to collect tax revenue on the retail sales. So unlike regular prescription drugs, the sales of marijuana will be taxed. There's a special 4% tax that will go towards a veterans health fund that was part of the amendment, and then any municipality can levy its existing sales tax. We can't add new taxes, but we can levy our existing sales tax.
So it'd be, depending on where you are in the city, it'll be anywhere from like 9 to 12%.
Right. I mean, when you start to get into some areas of downtown that have, community improvement districts, transportation development districts, on top of your traditional sales tax, it could be a fairly high. You might see 16, 17% tax on this product. when you factor all the taxes together.
And would the money just go into general revenue in the city, or does it have to go toward some specific cause?
No, it flows to general revenue. Obviously, unless there's a special tax levied, it would go to that taxing fund, but it flows to general revenue.
Are you expecting there to be in the way that when the first push for a soccer stadium went through the secondary use tax increase was supposed to be earmarked to specific things? Do you think there'll be an effort at the board to earmark for specific things out of that medical marijuana tax?
That's a good question. I don't even know that we have the authority to do that. Again, we have the authority to regulate zoning, time and place restrictions, and we have the ability to levy our existing taxes. I don't think we actually have the authority to create a special tax and say, marijuana taxes from marijuana sales are going to go into this pot. Now, I think through the appropriations process, if we see, we see a big uptick in retail sales as a result of this, we can appropriate those funds however we want.
And the types of things that would actually be allowed under this zoning arrangement, it would be like places that grow marijuana, I guess places that sell marijuana as well.
Right. So you've got a couple, there's basically three types of licenses, the three main types of licenses. There's more than this, but the main ones that most folks will care about are you have a cultivation license, right? That's to grow marijuana, and that's going to be mainly in large facilities, and that will be limited to industrial areas, and that's sort of best practices. We've talked to a lot of cities and states where this, where we already have either medical or full legalization, and even operators in this industry would all say you should be in an industrial area if you're growing marijuana. The second type of license is a manufacturing infusion license, and that's for folks who are making products out of marijuana. That is also sort of a light manufacturing industrial use. Same zoning restrictions. You're going to need to be in an industrial area to do those functions. And the last license, which is probably the one most people are interested in and care about, is the dispensary licenses. And under the amendment basically puts a default 1,000-foot restriction on all three licenses: dispensary, manufacturing, and cultivation, from any church, school, or daycare. Okay, so you got to be 1,000 feet away. Well, in the city of St. Louis, that's pretty difficult because you're almost always 1,000 feet from a church, school, or daycare center. So what we sought to do was we have the ability under the amendment to lessen that requirement. We can't go farther than 1,000 feet, but we can go less. So I've been working with the mayor's office and a number of stakeholders to basically look at what would be easiest for folks willing to invest their money and try to start these businesses, and frankly easiest for the city. And we just decided we're going to go straight zoning. We're going to get rid of that 1,000-foot requirement, drop it to 0, but limit by zoning which districts you can be in. So essentially, if you're a marijuana dispensary, you're going to be treated like any other pharmacy use and allowed in retail districts where that's already permissible.
And that was going to be my next question. Are you going to try to make sure through this legislation that it's not all just concentrated in one part of the city? Because I go to the St. Louis County Council as well, unfortunately, and one of the things that they're talking about is a source of income requirement for housing, which I believe the city actually already has. And because there is none in the county, most like Section 8 units are in North St. Louis County. Is it going to be structured in a way so you're not just sending all the dispensaries to like North City or South City or the Central Quarter? They're going to be all over the place, basically.
As written, it does not contain any restrictions on sort of where you can operate other than zoning areas. And frankly, I'm not sure under the amendment that we have the ability to put those sort of requirements, geographical requirements on these facilities. And you got to remember, we're only talking about 24 licenses for the whole 1st Congressional District. I hope all of them are in the city, but we have no idea.
And that's 24 of all three of the things you mentioned, not 24 dispensaries, right?
It's 24 dispensary licenses. Sorry, the requirements for the other licenses differ and actually are based on census totals. And then there's a limit on how many, one licensed applicant, how many cultivation centers they can have, how many dispensaries.
What's your read on, because you are lessening that 1,000-foot radius, what's your read on where kind of the board is going to go with this? I know you said you've been working with stakeholders, but I could see a lot of people saying, you know what, there's retail districts right by my church, there's retail districts by my schools. Right. I don't want my kids, my churchgoers to to experience this.
Yeah, and so, and thus far I haven't heard a lot of pushback from my colleagues. I mean, I'm going to encourage them to all look at the ward-level results for Amendment 2 in their respective districts. I mean, this thing got, upwards of 80% in, I think, every ward in the city. We've started at zero. I think that's easiest for everyone to understand. And you've got to remember, this is a heavily regulated industry. It's not like kids are going to be able to walk into one of these facilities. I mean, you need only 2 to 3% of the population of Missouri will actually acquire these medical marijuana cards and be able to walk into one of these facilities.
That's a good point to mention. And a lot of the regulation on who actually gets these licenses, it's all done by
That's
the
all
state.
at the state level. And I would suspect if years down the road, the state of Missouri, if this works out well and the state decides, like many other states are doing, to go full legalization, we'll have to revisit this zoning. This zoning's specific to medical marijuana. I mean, I think there could be some more restrictions placed if you went full legal. But for medical marijuana, when you have such a small number of people that are actually going to be getting these cards and going into these facilities, we didn't see a need for a distance requirement.
So let's talk about a couple of other things that have been bouncing around the board or will be bouncing around the board. I want to talk about MLS soccer because for whatever reason, you're always tasked with shuttling around what were very controversial stadium proposals.
Despite the fact that the site is not actually in your ward.
No, it's a few hundred yards out of the 7th ward.
I suspect that might change in the next redistricting, but
I'm sure that you don't ever want to recall the whole NFL stadium debacle, which was extremely controversial and basically caused a schism on the board that still is being felt today.
Yeah, and that was some of my first
that
legislation
was in your
that
ward
I sponsored.
too, actually.
No, actually it was not.
It was in Tamika Hubbard's ward.
That's right.
That stadium was in the 5th ward, although part of the parking was in the 7th ward.
Right.
And even with the last soccer stadium, even though that was less controversial than the NFL stadium, it still was controversial in the sense that it was diverting use tax money that could have gone to other things to the stadium. Now, I'm using that as a backdrop because what we're going to be talking about now is completely different.
Right.
Like there's not like a direct general revenue or special tax subsidy to help build this stadium. There are going to be taxes that you're hoping to have inside the stadium on products, and also the fact that there won't be property tax attached to it.
Correct.
I want to make sure I'm getting all these details correct.
You are, yeah. The goal, and this is all in the resolution that we passed. I mean, obviously, none of the actual authorizing legislation has been passed yet. But the goal is to basically levy 3 site-specific 1% sales taxes on the site to help offset construction costs. So any really public funding would be coming directly from taxes generated on the site.
Now,
that was SID, TDD, and
the Port Authority, and
which is
the Port Authority expansion bill did not pass last session. I frankly don't know what's going to happen with that. My colleagues had some serious concerns about expanding the boundaries of the Port Authority to the whole city, which I understand. And in light of the stuff we've seen in the county, I certainly get their concerns. I think you may see an effort to expand the Port Authority maybe into just parts of downtown or even a strip out to that site.
Well,
that's what I was thinking. Is they're just going to run it up market?
They might, actually. I don't know. I'm not involved in those conversations.
Do you think that the backlash over the other 2 stadiums compelled the ownership group to put forth a proposal that didn't feature direct funding like the other 2?
And I think so. And I think this ownership group, as it's currently structured, is more committed to St. Louis and doesn't necessarily want to be reaching into the general funds of the city. I think the Taylors are in this for the long game. This is a civic investment for them.
Mm-hmm.
They're not necessarily looking for a huge return in the early years.
Is it also helpful that the Taylor family combined are worth literally billions of dollars, and building like a stadium is not a huge expenditure for them?
Well, that certainly probably helps. I think part of the last ownership group was also worth billions of dollars.
That's true.
The gentleman from I don't remember where he's from, Bain Capital or something.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I mean,
Forgot
he was
about that.
a multi-billionaire. But this is obviously a family that's made hundreds of millions of dollars of investment already downtown. I mean, between the Arch grounds and the amount of money that the Taylor family put into there, and to Soldiers Memorial, which is in the 7th ward, of which they contributed nearly $40 million.
Oh my, yeah.
Well, plus also Enterprise. Naming rights to Enterprise Center.
Correct.
That's fair. I want to talk though about the fact that there's not going to be property tax on this, and this is actually something I asked Board of Aldermen President Lewis Reed, I think it was either earlier this year or last year when the resolution you mentioned was being debated. This is his response to some of the criticism that they're not putting property tax on the stadium.
No. You can't look at it like that. We haven't gotten a dime off this property in 60 years, right? It's that MoDOT controls it, right? So we're not getting taxes out. So it's not like we're exempting, we're taking money. It doesn't work that way. But the majority of this thing is being funded by site-based taxes. So if you do not attend a game, you don't pay, right? But if you attend a game, you pay. Guess who's going to attend those games? 90% of the people outside of the city of St. Louis. The people who will benefit are the people of the city. We benefit hugely because of this. And then in the future, we have an opportunity to either continue to grow that league, right, on site and grow the team on site. But if the team decides they want to pack up and leave, what are we left with? We're left with a piece of ground, one of the most valuable pieces of land in the city of St. Louis, once the pre-development money goes in, for absolutely zero cost to the taxpayers, plus millions of dollars a year every year that they're there. So that's all good for the city of St. Louis.
Now, I understand that SLPS Superintendent Calvin Adams testified in favor of this resolution. And I also understand that the Taylor family has given a lot of money to SLPS, and they may give more money to SLPS after this, maybe to develop soccer programs or whatnot. But as somebody who just left the city of St. Louis because the special education system at SLPS is woefully underfunded, it's hard for me to hear a clip like that and think, well, maybe getting property tax on the stadium that would go largely to the SLPS school system is not a worthy idea. So I want you to respond to the criticism that you're going to hear during this debate about the lack of property taxes.
So I guess it really starts with the ownership of the land, right? And Lewis pointed out that the land's currently publicly owned. All right, so if the land flowed, if we did this through private land fundings, right? So now we're going to be cutting off basically sources of municipal financing that we can use, low interest. We're going to be driving up the cost of the project through not being able to use low interest municipal bonds to help finance this. We'd also, if it's not publicly owned, if this league goes belly up, now the state, a government entity, will have given land to a private entity that is paying some cost for it, but a nominal cost for the land that would then be privately held. In this scenario, with the land being publicly owned and a long-term lease of which the ownership group will be responsible for maintenance and upkeep and improvements to the facility. If at the end of that lease, they walk away, if the league's not successful for some reason, well, we own cleaned up, developable, marketable parcels of land. The city does, not a private entity. So I think that's the rationale behind it is, one, being able to access the financing tools that are only available to municipal corporations, and two, at the end of this, making sure, if this doesn't work out, that we own the land, not a private developer who can enrich themselves off of it. If I could, on the property tax front, I get it. This won't be paying property taxes. It will be paying a lot of other taxes that are not currently paid. Remember, this land generates zero revenues right now. And if this was a private development, frankly, that was private land, it would most likely be requesting and receiving a large amount of tax abatement, and also it'd still not be paying taxes.
That's fair.
Well, and also, too, I mean, we've seen, especially in North City, what happens when a developer who had a plan no longer is executing that plan and still has land, thousands of acres of land, hundreds of acres of land locked up up in North City around the NGA site.
Yeah. Well, here's my question, though. Would you want in whatever lease you hammer out, because I think if they get a team, I think there may be a lease since this will be a publicly owned
there'll be
entity.
a lease. And that lease will have to be passed by the Board of Aldermen.
Would you want some sort of component to that lease where the ownership group promises to pay a certain amount of money to the St. Louis public school system?
So that would be some sort of pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. I don't know. I would want to hear from the superintendent. The school district has a lot of problems. It also has levied additional taxes. I don't know how many of their problems are necessarily financial versus some management issues, and frankly, the size of the district versus the number of students it's serving.
Well, let's talk about something that may seem like minor, but actually was kind of a big hubbub in the beginning, and that's the rules of the Board of Aldermen.
Yes.
It was interesting because I was there on the first day, and you all didn't actually pass the rules. You were like a lawless aldermanic body for a couple.
Which questionably maybe with the rules even, I don't know.
Well, which brought up some additional points. People were during the second week arguing about procedure, and I finally said, well, really, we don't actually have any rules yet. So what procedure are you saying we're not following?
Does it default to Robert's rules?
No, we default to the rules of the United States House of Representatives.
That's right.
So for a little background, there were a couple of things that were proposed that were different from the other rules before. One was to bar registered lobbyists to be on the floor of the Board of Aldermen, and the other was to potentially create like a ticketing system for people to sit in the gallery as opposed to the floor. My understanding is the lobbyist ban ended up being incorporated, and the ticketing system was eventually tossed out. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. And, so I drafted the rule change, and I modeled it after actually the United States House of Representatives rules as it relates to former members being in the the hallways around the chambers. And so it's registered lobbyists are banned from the floor of the Board of Aldermen, except for the rare circumstance of when we meet as a committee of the whole, and there actually might be necessary to have the testimony of a lobbyist, because that doesn't happen often, but it could.
Can't remember the last time they've done committee of the whole hearing.
We don't do many. For personnel reasons, we will sometimes. We also had to make sure we were exempting members of our own body, some of whom are registered lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only does it ban registered lobbyists, it bans people that have a pecuniary interest in legislation pending. Because every week at the board, and you guys both have spent some time there, there's a lot of people roaming around on that floor, some of whom are registered lobbyists, and most people know who they are, and obviously that's a matter of public record. But there's a lot of other people that frankly probably should be registered that are not, but are still on the floor roaming around whispering in people's ears. So I wanted to make sure we were covering all of those segments, and I think we did with this rule change.
I want to ask about that particular point, because one of the downsides of this is, maybe they're not in physical proximity to aldermen, but lobbyists can still text people. They can send homing pigeons.
Smoke signals.
They can paper airplanes with things. And I actually asked Alderwoman Heather Navarro about this particular point, and this is what she had to say.
I do think it makes a difference when we're down here as a deliberative body doing our work during an official meeting of the Board of Aldermen, for us to be, to be accountable. And I do think that for the public has to ultimately have trust in this body as well. And if they're sitting up in the gallery watching us have side conversations with lobbyists, regardless of the fact that lobbyist, yes, could technically be texting or whatnot, it erodes the public trust. So I do think it's more than optics. Those optics have a big impact on what happens.
So do you think this is more than just optics?
I do, and I agree wholeheartedly with the comments of my colleague from the 28th Ward. And actually, Heather was very helpful with tweaking some parts of the proposed rule that finally did pass, which did remove the gallery stuff. But look, are we removing money from politics and the influence of lobbyists with this rule change? Absolutely not. But we are certainly making a step to show that we take ourselves seriously, that the optics of the board, that we should be making decisions on our own. I mean, it drives me crazy. Some of my colleagues will have registered lobbyists sitting at their desks, and I don't think that's appropriate. If you're sponsoring legislation, you should be able to get up and speak to its merits and to what is contained within those bills. But yes, folks are still going to have influence, and frankly, that's part of our democratic process. But we need to take ourselves seriously, whether it's some of the comments that sometimes are made from the floor, or the fact that what Heather mentioned is that you see people glad-handing and whispering in the ears of people who are lobbyists and campaign contributors. That shouldn't be happening. And I'm not familiar with any other deliberative body, whether it's the state Senate or the state House or Congress or anywhere else, that allows lobbyists to roam freely on the floor. Or really anyone with an interest in legislation that's not in the body or a staffer.
And also, I mean, the U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, State Senate, there's nothing that prevents them from taking calls, getting pulled off the floor. It
happens all the time. But why did you guys get rid of the gallery pass system? Because I know that there was an outcry on social media about it. Some people were thinking that it was like a infringement of free speech or free association. It also just seemed like a whole lot of bureaucracy,
it would
considering not that the Board of Aldermen is rarely full.
It would have been a lot more work. Look, it was in the initial rule that was proposed, partially because there was some concern, and it's not like I just drafted this thing in a vacuum. I talked to some of my colleagues into the president's office. There was some concern that, okay, if we get all these folks, because actually you guys are there, there's sometimes a lot of people down on the floor. If you get all those folks out of there, you might have a situation where the gallery is now constantly full of lobbyists and those who have some interest in some financial interest in what's going on at the board, and we wanted to make sure there was room for our constituents. Now that proposal passed out of our caucus with little to no debate. Ultimately, I guess when the public heard about it, that I would have thought the time to debate that was in caucus, and frankly would have been prepared to strip it out of there then. But ultimately we had to let that noodle over for a while, talk to some other people, and it came out. And the gallery is open to anybody and will remain open to anybody, and I think that's fine.
This is probably a very insular point, but I do have to ask this question. Now that the Board of Aldermen is 100% Democratic, and the fact I think you all met, I think at Jeffrey Boyd's nightclub or something like that.
His event space.
Event space?
Yeah.
I've heard some people that didn't particularly approve of that because it may have actually violated open records laws. Has there been any discussion about whether, because Annie Rice is now D 8th Ward and not I 8th Ward, about whether that was something that maybe
technically a meeting of the Board of Aldermen?
Yes.
Well, I don't think it was, because we didn't talk about any legislation. We talked about our rules, which are approved by the caucus, aren't fully approved until we get to the full board. It's a political meeting. I would see it's no different than the caucus of the few remaining Democrats in the state Senate,
but they're also not a majority.
Okay, so the Republicans in the state House, they can meet in a caucus, and that's not an open meeting for your purposes. You don't get to sit in on their caucus meetings. It's a political meeting. Now, if you start debating the merits of soccer financing or some public bill that's already introduced and exists, then yes, I think you're getting into maybe an open meeting, but I don't think that's what happens at caucus.
It's just another reason why you should get rid of party affiliation altogether, or that the
in the city, at least,
quote-unquote progressives should just call themselves the Renegade Party and start their own caucus. We'll be back after this short message with Alderman Jack Coatar.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
And we're back with Alderman Jack Coatar, the St. Louis Alderman for the 7th Ward. We're going to talk about city-county merger because when we were inviting you on the show and I was talking with you on the phone, you were actually telling me that you were inclined to support the now scuttled Better Together proposal.
That's right. I'm probably one of the few of the region's 600-plus elected officials that said a nice word about it.
Well, before we get to kind of where we go next and what happened this week, can you kind of explain why you took that position? Because we've had a lot of, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, we've had a lot of people come and sit where you are and just say Better Together is the worst thing ever. It needs to be killed with with an axe or something. Right. But I do think it's important for people to hear the other side and a different perspective. So what drew you to that proposal?
So, what drew me to the proposal is, one, some of the folks working on this thing are people I know and trust. And while I don't agree with Rex Singfield on many things, I think his interest in city-county unification and kind of revamping this region are sincere, and I thought this proposal was fairly well thought out. I didn't love everything in it, but I liked enough of it to think this is worth doing, and we can fix the problems in it later. I represent downtown. I represent the downtown central business district. I'm tired of constantly competing against Clayton, minutes down the road, for jobs and resources when we should be working together. There's absolutely no reason that these should be separate tax pools, separate cities working against each other when they're minutes from each other. It drives me crazy to have to try to lure businesses from Clayton and see Clayton luring businesses from downtown. If professional service firms want to be in Clayton, great. We'll take all the marketing firms and all the whatever
deed recording firms,
whatever other businesses we have
real
downtown.
Estate firms.
That interests me. The possibility of sort of streamlining parts of government very much interests me. So obviously we have a lot of duplicative services that government's offering. But I think what was most important and what kind of got lost in this thing was, these were some big, bold proposals to revamp the authority of municipalities in Missouri. Just the city re-entering the county, if maybe that's where this is headed, and that's still a good first step, but that doesn't solve the problems we have. That doesn't solve the problems of these kangaroo municipal courts that, while we've put some further restrictions with Senate Bill 5 on their ability to raise revenues, are still mistreating citizens. It doesn't solve the problem of these unaccredited police departments taking advantage of citizens. I mean, just look at this. Look at what's going on in this St. Anne Police Department with these guys dragging people out of cars,
St. Anne
breaking
accredited,
windows.
Rachel, by the way?
That is a good question.
I don't actually know if they're accredited or not, but based on that policy alone that they have of allowing their police department to chase people wherever the heck they want, they shouldn't be. And it's not best practices in law enforcement. So it's, you see these problems. None of those problems are fixed by the city simply re-entering the county. Can we save some money on recording deeds by re-entering the county?
Yeah,
probably. But we're not fixing the bigger issues. And that's, I think, what this proposal was trying to get at and was trying to address. But I can't disagree that there was a lot of stumbles along the way in the last few months.
Well, let's talk about that because I didn't really mention that in the outset of this. The Better Together proposal was going to go to a statewide vote, and they announced. We're recording this on Thursday, and Washington University Chancellor Mark Wrighton announced on Monday that they were scrapping the statewide vote and they were going to try to do something more locally. This is part of his comments he made to both me and KMOX's Kevin Killeen about one of the rationales.
Well, I find that many people do not attend to things that they hear about until it's right in front of them and confronts them. The January 28th launch of Unite STL, which is the campaign to implement the plan of Better Together, that got people's attention. And it created the opportunity for many discussions, and it's evident that our community needs more education about what it is necessary, the problems we face, and how best to solve them.
So I mentioned social media and reaction.
Yeah.
People have not reacted favorably at all to that comment. And with full disclosure, my wife works at Washington University, so I like that institution.
Right.
But that has not been well received.
No, to just say that, people just need more education and they would have loved this plan is, I don't think true. There was a lot of pushback to it. Now, I always expected, and I think the folks behind this expected, there would be a lot of pushback, especially from the political class, because you're revamping how government's structured in this region, and a lot of people are going to lose their political jobs, and some people are going to lose their municipal jobs. I think he's correct when he says that this did start a good discussion. My fear is, now that this Better Together proposal is dead, that we're all just going to fight and talk about this for a couple of years, then it's going to fizzle out and nothing's ever going to happen. What drives me kind of particularly crazy about some of the criticism, and believe me, I see it. I'm on social media. I hear it. I get yelled at about some of this stuff by my colleagues. But what drives me particularly crazy is we are many years from Ferguson and from the Ferguson Commission's report saying, look, you guys need to shape up this region and do something bold and dramatic. The folks criticizing these plan have offered no other solutions. Better Together at least put its money where its mouth is. They studied the issue for years. They got smart people in the room to come up with a plan. They went and met with cities that had similar problems, that did something similar, Indianapolis, Nashville, Louisville, and they modeled a plan that has worked for those cities, not perfectly, but has worked in some levels. They modeled it off of those. But instead, what we get is, no, this is terrible, Rex is awful, this plan stinks, but no solutions being offered by these folks.
How much, though, could a plan that doesn't address some of the serious other inequalities, especially education, and I think zoning kind of got left out of there, too. Yeah. How much of that was, we're going to use the language of Ferguson, but some of the underlying issues don't really get tackled, especially education?
So Rachel, I would ask you this. If they had rolled out a plan that tried to do what they did as it relates to municipal governance and also tackle education, do you think the naysayers would have supported that?
Probably not.
First of all, they never promised they were going to do education.
They made it very clear they were not going to.
Number two, I think that fixing education is a separate thing that requires a lot of serious discussion, and I don't think it can just be pigeonholed into a municipal overhaul. And that's there are definitely missteps that Better Together did.
Right.
And I think the criticism that Rachel mentioned is definitely a valid one. But I think that context needs to be said. But you continue in your answer.
Yeah. So, and I served on some panels where I spoke about Better Together, and I spoke to a lot of judges and lawyers at various meetings about it because it did have some big impacts on the judiciary and the legal system. But no one would disagree that education's a problem. Frankly, so are fire districts. Fire districts weren't included in the proposal. And the reason being is trying to tackle all of these things at once simply got too cumbersome and too difficult. So the decision was made, okay, we're going to do what we can to address municipal governments, municipal courts, police departments, municipal taxes to some extent, and go with that plan. And then once we sort that out, move on to education. But I think they were at least honest when they said, we can't do all this at once. We can't tackle these issues and education simultaneously.
Well, I mentioned Recorder of Deeds earlier as a joke, but I do want to play this clip now from St. Louis Recorder of Deeds, Michael Butler. And he actually told, I think, Rachel, you were in on this podcast, and it was actually the day before the Better Together plan was to be rolled out, but we kind of clued him in on what was going to happen. And he had these comments, which I think turned out to be fairly prophetic, in my opinion.
Policy-wise, this makes, sometimes the city-county merger makes a lot of sense. And I've always said privately that the city and county are going to merge eventually, but only when the African-American community is ready. And I don't believe the African-American community is ready, power-wise or politically-wise, for a city-county merger. When you talk about eliminating African-American held offices in the city, where we now have 7 of 9 citywide offices, you're going to make a lot of African-American community members very angry about that, and they're going to probably vote against it. And then on the other side, I think African-Americans in the county don't see themselves enough in county government in order to support a city-county merger.
Now, before I ask that question, we did ask Recorder Butler about the prospect of merging with the county Recorder of Deeds, and he basically said, if I merge into the county, the person the appointed Recorder of Deeds does a great job, and it's fine. I'll find something else to do. But the black political community was adamantly opposed to this plan, and I do think that he's correct that any merger proposal has to have political support from both the city and the county black community. I know this is a weird question to ask a white politician like yourself, but would you agree that that was another reason why this just never got off the ground?
I don't disagree with Mike's comments at all, and he's a buddy of mine, and I supported him. I told him when I did that I don't think we should be electing Recorders of Deeds, but as long as we are, I'll support you, Mike. But no, look, we did. I mean, the African American political community obviously pushed back in a big way. And I think whatever the next plan is, needs to do a better job of bringing some black political supporters into the process. But if we do merge the city and the county, I mean, some of the state, Michael referenced the statewide elected offices in the city that are currently held by African Americans. Whether they're held by African Americans or white politicians, they shouldn't be elected. We shouldn't be electing someone to run the parking division of the city. We shouldn't be electing someone to record deeds. We frankly shouldn't even, we have a Board of Estimate and Apportionment, but we shouldn't necessarily be electing fiscal officers for the city. But we do all those things right now, right? It's in our charter, and we do it, and I'm going to continue to support candidates for those positions as long as they're elected. But at some point, we need to probably get with the times and have a little more modern form of government, of which, that's the reason the county charter in the original plan was used as sort of the model, because it's written in the 70s, I think, and much newer than the city's very antiquated charter.
So you mentioned that there were some missteps in there, and I'm curious as to what you think was ultimately, if there is a biggest one that you think ended up tanking this, or was just an accumulation of death by 1,000 cuts?
Well, I think a combination. It was certainly becoming death by 1,000 cuts, but I think the death blow to the current plan was certainly the new county executive basically saying, I don't know what his exact words were, but basically saying he is not for this plan. I mean, I don't know how you could pass this thing and implement it without the support of the county executive and the mayor, given how it was structured.
You're a great seguer, by the way, because I actually that you're referring to Sam Page, who replaced Steve Stenger after he resigned. And when we're talking about next steps, I think the way to keep this discussion going is through what's historically been known as the Board of Freeholders, which is a body that's appointed by the mayor and the county executive, and they come up with some sort of merger plan that would be voted on locally. I asked County Executive Page whether he's had any discussions with Mayor Cruson about appointing that. This was his response from a couple days ago.
Mostly Mayor Cruson and I talked about our opportunities for cooperation and including the economic partnership. I think that's something that has to be restored quickly. We talked about our concerns about the Better Together proposal as it was being presented. And I think we did talk about the concept of the Board of Freeholders, but we didn't take that discussion very far because there were two important things in front of it. But I look forward to meeting with her, and we'll talk about the Board of Freeholder process and try and understand what our legal options are and how we could initiate that. There seems to be a lot of support for it, but before I do that, I want to sit down with Municipal League leadership and understand their concerns.
So this wasn't really brought up a lot when you were talking to Better Together, because the reason they mentioned they needed the statewide vote is because they wanted to consolidate the muni courts and the police departments, which was more of a legal question. But I think they may not have wanted to admit this, but let's just be honest with ourselves. It would have been easier to pass this on a statewide level.
No, that's true.
Because it has been put on a local level for many decades, and it's failed every time.
Right.
So my question is, even if the county executive and the mayor do start this freeholders process and they come up with maybe a somewhat similar plan, is this just going to crash and burn like all the other proposals that have gone down the pike?
That's entirely possible. And I think that, this region ultimately is going to have to make some hard decisions. If we're going to do this as a region and not involve the whole state, which politically I think made it easier to do if we had a big statewide vote, this is going to be hard to do locally. And, I'm a little skeptical that we'll get it done, especially, the municipal league. If you start to involve all those municipal mayors, the folks who have the loudest voices in that organization are the folks who don't want to see any change. They represent towns that they think are run just fine, and things work out great for them. Well, that's not the case in many municipalities in St. Louis County. So I'm hopeful we can come up with a plan. Maybe it's through the Board of Freeholders. Maybe we need to go see the state, and I think this has been floated out there, and get some more authority for the Board of Freeholders. I think it's a creature of the state, which has limited authority. And if we're going to tackle the big issues as it relates to municipal courts and police departments, and frankly even political boundaries, we might need to get that Board of Freeholders some more authority.
And it's actually in the state constitution, and there's some disagreement among fancy attorneys about how powerful the Board of Freeholders is and how expansive it could be. But one thing that I had heard is if the Better Together group does pursue a statewide vote now, it would be to expand the power of the Board of Freeholders so there's no legal ambiguity there, which I would think would probably be less controversial than...
I'm sure folks will still find a reason to be against it, because it's pretty easy to be against things.
It's pretty easy to be. In the last few minutes we have here, I think Rachel wants to ask a question about your political future, so I'm going to let her do that.
Yeah, so 2021, you'd be done with your second term at the Board of Aldermen. It's first and a half, I think, because there was the special in their second and a half.
I was elected in a special in 2015, my first term in 2017. So, yeah, I'd be running for, I guess, my second full term in 2021.
For your second full term in 2021.
Right.
We have no idea what the boundaries could look like for where you're going to run.
In my election, the boundaries should look the same. Redistricting would happen sometime after that.
That's right.
Yeah.
But have you given any thought to going beyond the borders of your district? Maybe for a citywide office? Or...
Oh, we'll see. Look, honestly, I was going to be very involved in this effort to merge the city and the county, and I still expect to be. I don't know what my political future holds. In the next couple of years, I hope to figure that out. I know my wife would really like me to figure that out, either move up in this world or go practice law. I don't know what I'm going to do. I really don't.
Would you consider running for circuit attorney next year, given that you worked in that office?
I did work in that office. I love that office. It's still the best job I ever had working there. I don't know. We'll see. The current circuit attorney certainly got herself in some hot water, and I think there is a growing number of people who are concerned about her job performance and that office's ability to prosecute cases. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to ask you next year that
As
question.
They say in the biz, stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Thank you very much, Alderman. I hope that you'll be heading back to the wonderful suburbs of Chicago soon to visit
gosh,
people.
I don't know when I'm up there next. Yeah. It'll be a while, but thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Jason. This was a lot of fun.
This was a lively discussion. All our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter, Jay Rosenbaum. Follow Rachel on Twitter at
R. Lippmann, 2 P's, 2 N's.
How do people follow you on Twitter?
Jay Coatar, Jcoatar.
Until next time, so long.